The surprise team in 2023 will be that and more this week on the couch. The return of Mike Clay. Mike, the surprise team, the surprise offense of 2023 will be.
I'm going to go with, how about this? The Cleveland Browns.
Ooh.
Right? Come on. They're going to open up the offense this year, Sigmund.
Yeah.
Deshaun Watson's going to have a bounce back year. They improved a little at wide receiver. That O-line is still nothing short of elite. This is the year I think the Browns are going to make a leap and be a contender in a stacked AFC.
So you and I believe our own Jason Wood, and y'all are fluent in numbers, I believe are the only people that are doing projections before the draft, right? I mean, it's real. That's hardcore. So you're already really fluent and conversant with the ways all of the different pieces of the offenses fit together. So just off the top of your head, Mike, if Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins are reunited, how is that going to change your projections? Are people that have Hopkins going to be happy with that projection? I know you took Amari Cooper in our MFL 10 of death. Are you going to be sad? Is it a little more, the pie gets bigger for everybody, so don't worry. Let's project DeAndre Hopkins to the Browns and its potential fantasy football implications.
Well, I mean, right now I have Cooper at a little over 70 catches, around 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. Needless to say, those numbers will drop if DeAndre Hopkins is there. But overall, I mean, that would make you feel a little bit more like there's a chance for this to be an all
Right.
full-on breakout for this Browns offense. You think about kind of what, a team like, just for example, maybe not to this level, but a team like the Eagles last year, right, where it all came together. And then they just exploded and were one of the top scoring offenses in the NFL. There's obviously more potential for that if they add a number one receiver. But it is funny that they're kind of considered to be in this market for Hopkins because, all early offseason, this was a team where it was like, man, the receivers are so bad. They need help for Amari Cooper. They have to address this position. And then they make like a low end trade for Elijah Moore, who, look, I get the pedigree. I know he's flashed at times, but man, the guy, he's not a sure thing, right? And then they get him, and then everyone's like, oh, now they're great at receiver. It's how can you rank these receivers so low? I do them unit grades, and I have them kind of a little bit below average as a room now. But now Browns fans are like, we need DeAndre Hopkins to make this room good. So it's like, man, which is it? Are they good or are they not? So
Right.
It's kind of an interesting dynamic there for sure, but there's no doubt. I mean, you set up this offense as is with a Deshaun Watson in his second year with the team, his first full season, and he really gets it going the right direction, like the player he was in Houston. There's a lot to like, but if you add, even at 30, 31 years old, DeAndre Hopkins to a room with Cooper and potentially more if he develops well, and Njoku, Nick Chubb, I mean, not to mention the elite offensive line, this could be a superstar Browns offense for sure.
Knee-jerk reaction, Mike. Who would be ranked higher, DeAndre Hopkins or Amari Cooper?
Man, that's a tough one. I'm going to lean towards Hopkins. I know he's a little bit older. The reason I'd say that is because throughout his career, no matter where he's been, no matter who the quarterback is, no matter who the competition is, he has demanded a massive target share. There was one blip in that, and that was in the 2021 season where that usage fell, and we thought maybe the age was catching up with him. But that was not the case last year, right? When he was on the field, he saw a massive target share in that Arizona offense, regardless of the quarterback. Whereas Amari Cooper has not always been that guy. We were kind of irritated with him when he was in Dallas because the targets just weren't there. The target share was weak. It was really disappointing. We saw that early in CeeDee Lamb's career as well, which was suspect and made you think maybe it was more of a coaching thing or a Dak Prescott thing. Cooper did get that last year, but that was the first time in his career where he has just demanded a massive target share like that. So I would lean a little bit toward Hopkins, but I think it'll be, target share wise, I think it'll be very close. A lot like, the comp I just made. Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown had very similar target shares last year.
How do you approach projecting the Browns when Deshaun Watson was so atrocious in his short sample? How do you balance that with Deshaun Watson's history and then your optimism about the Browns?
Yeah, so I'm not punishing him too much for last season, right? Because the sample's so small. We have a much larger sample of seeing him on the field. And the last time he played a full season, he literally led the NFL in passing yards. He was Very productive. Obviously, adds a lot of value with his legs. So, to some extent, you'll look at it and you say, okay, well, like there's all this Anthony Richardson hype, and this is a guy that's might be poor as a passer this season. There's a really good chance of that. Well, simply because he's a rookie quarterback, but also because of his inexperience and troubles throwing the ball at the college level. But we're still buying in because he can run the ball so well, right? Well, I mean, Watson, even if he does struggle as a passer, he can do a lot with his legs as well, right? I've been projected for 99 carries, almost 500 rushing yards, and 4 touchdowns this season. So, and this is a guy that has a high ceiling as a passer. So, I'm kind of buying into it. I like the opportunity here to essentially buy low on Deshaun Watson. From a projection standpoint, again, my model is just not going to overweight what we saw last season. Is it factored in a little bit? Yes, but I'm looking more at the history of Deshaun Watson, what we know about him as a player. When I sort of figure out what his YPA's completion percentage, that kind of stuff is going to look like.
Yeah, that's it. That's the good, sober analysis. That's why we were good foils for each other, Mike, back in the day, back in the good old days on Twitter.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because I'm emotional. I overreact to things. I get caught up in things. And have you heard my saying? I try to say it as much as I can that about you. I say death, taxes, and Mike Clay. How does that? How do you react? I just feel
Is
like
that
you're inevitable. Like Mike Clay winning, Mike Clay being right. It's inevitable, like death and taxes.
I don't know about that. I think it's just. I mean, I get my fair share of stuff wrong, but my strategy is try to be wrong as less often as possible. I used to
Yeah,
always say, I still say this, like every offseason I'm working on my model and trying to get like 1% better every year,
sure.
right? So if I do that and I just keep chipping away and get a little better, maybe win 55% of the time, then I'm right 56% of the time, then 57, just keep
Right.
chipping away at it. There's a limit on that in this game. It's just such a high variance game. 40+% of this game is probably variance,
Right.
which makes it tough. But just finding the things you need to focus in on, things that don't matter, ignore those, focus on the things that do matter. If you just continue to train your brain, it takes a time, as you just keep getting better, right? You just keep
Yeah.
training your brain to know what to look at and what not to look at. And that could take you a long way. And there
A
are exceptions
lifetime.
to that. There are always exceptions, but I think that's a good winning strategy long term.
I like that you started at 55% because it's the humility of knowing that even the
Oh
very
my God, yeah.
best, I don't think anybody could ever get above 60% accuracy. There's just too many things we don't know, and the game changes. The considerations change, the limits when you look at especially the way you do from the number standpoint and you're tracking it, things that you wouldn't have projected in the past, things that you would have said, well, that's outside of the limits of what has happened. So you're really going out on a limb if you're projecting that. Now you're not out on a limb, or that limb gets thicker and it can hold support a lot more, and you do go out on that limb. So you mentioned it. I'll just ask you to expand on this. Tell me this off season something that you adjusted or something you examined a little deeper to try to get part of that 1% better in 2023.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things is, um, man, there's probably a couple ways I could look at this. I think something that I've looked at more and more recently is trying to incorporate, offensive line play more and
Mm-hmm.
how that's going to affect running back efficiency. So, you and I actually, I think we exchanged a couple tweets on that. Split it. So I do the unit grades and I rate offensive lines, and you talked about looking at it pass blocking versus run blocking. So I've recently been looking into that a little bit. I'm working on a piece right now, an NFL piece, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of each roster. And I've been kind of honing in on that a little bit. So still learning, still in the early days of that. But that's one of those things. Like you just talked about how it's always evolving, the game's always changing. That's true, but so is our understanding of the
Yeah.
NFL, right? It's still unlike baseball. It's the analytics push and the player tracking is still pretty new. And the sample is small. We only have a few seasons of certain things like the chips and helmets and stuff like that. So we're still learning a lot about that. And there's so much more to be learned. And one of those areas is offensive line play, right? That's been a metric that, remember when we started a decade ago, there was really nothing. It was like
Mm-mm.
sacks allowed, like then it was
Right.
PFF grades, which are valuable. But now we're stats and info here at ESPN does pass blocking win rate, run blocking win rate, those kind of things. And that's given us a new level of understanding. And again, it's still early. I'm still learning all kinds of new things about the effect of O-line play. So I'd say that's something I've honed in on that. And also, um, for a long time, pretty much always, I've used as like the driver for how good an offense is. I would project like expected touchdowns, right? So this is like a 2.5 touchdowns per game sort of offense, and that would drive other things, right? There are other metrics I would use to determine that number, but now I'm trying to be better than that, like use EPA as the kind of the driver to fuel everything down to field goal attempts, right? So that's probably the thing I spent the most time on here is using these better, improved efficiency metrics to kind of drive the whole projection model and team win projections as well.
Yeah, I think the way you're painting the picture makes sense, right? You can start at the top down, and
Mm-hmm.
then like the DeAndre Hopkins question, we can start at the bottom, the individual atomic pieces of the offense, and adjust that. And
Mm-hmm.
you meet in the middle. And you're always looking for those things. All right, let's step through some offenses that have had changes. New offensive coordinators, sometimes new head coaches, or otherwise offenses that are going to look different than the last time we saw them. Because in some ways, Mike, this is where you have to at least incorporate a little bit of subjective data,
Oh yeah.
right? You can't, if you just try to do N+1 with an offense that has a new offensive coordinator, well, you're ignoring that it's going to be different. We don't know necessarily how, the degree, or exactly how it's going to be different, but we know it's going to be different. So if you project it the same, you're probably going to be wrong. Let's start with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. And I guess the way that I can cast this up, and of course, Nathaniel Hackett, uh, they're a package deal, I guess. Do you think, and some of this is like, I don't know how well I know, or even what other people think, but just based on how you're projecting the Jets offense, because it was, when it wasn't Zach Wilson, it was pretty nice offense, but it's not the Nathaniel Hackett offense, or how much, again, there are unknowns here. Do you think you're probably more optimistic, more in on Rodgers and Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson, et cetera, based on how you're projecting it? Or do you think you probably underwhelm people, or maybe even seem a little pessimistic and not really projecting that, hey, Aaron Rodgers is going to be the panacea, the cure for everything for this offense?
Yeah, well, I think Rodgers could be a cure for Garrett Wilson, right? Because he was so heavily targeted last season, but the efficiency was poor, right? The catch rate was poor. He underperformed in the touchdown department based on his usage, and that was because of the poor quarterback play, right? So I feel great about him. I mean, I'm obviously not on an island. You look at his ADP, that's not a bold statement by any means, but I am buying the hype there with Garrett Wilson as a back end wide receiver one with upside for more. Would not shock me at all if we see that Rodgers sort, I don't want to say Devontae Adams connection, but to an extent, like target share wise, maybe Wilson becomes this guy and has a huge breakout season. So I'm buying into that. As for Rodgers, it's just, look, he burnt me last year. Everyone was down on him without Adams. I was buying in on him as like a weight at quarterback, just take a flyer on him. Like, granted, I was in on like Trevor Lawrence as a fallback, Justin Fields, take a flyer on a young guy as well, sort of thing. But Rodgers, his whole career had a high floor, right? He had been 13th or better in fantasy points per game every single season as a starter, top 9, all but one season. Even without Adams, it's like, how does he fall below that? But obviously he did. And a part of that was just he's just not a factor with his legs anymore. And that's not going to change this year, right? And also, the difference between now and a decade ago is that there are a lot more guys that can add value with their legs. So if you're not on zero in that department, it's going to crush your upside. Think about even Kirk Cousins. He can't get over the hump and into the top like 8 or so. He's just like a borderline QB1,
Mm-hmm.
even though he's putting up these huge passing numbers. The Vikings are 6th in touchdowns since he got there, and has not been like a good fantasy quarterback. He's been a fringe QB1, and that's why. So for Rodgers, I think he caps out as like a back end QB1, a stream. I think that's his ceiling, is like a streaming option. You just talked about Wilson. The only other guy then becomes Brees Hall, and that's just an injury question, right?
Right.
Not only is he looks like he's gonna be back for week 1, that's looking more and more likely, but he may not be. We don't know that for sure. And also, is he going to be the same guy this year? Is this a 2024 player, or is this a guy that can be good in 2023? That's a tricky one. So I think those are the guys I've kind of honed in on. After that, it's a lot of sort of committee action at tight end, and who's the number 2? Is it
Mm-hmm.
Lazard? Is Davis going to play a lot? Is Cobb going to roll? How many touches does Hardman get? So those are pretty much the 3 key guys that we kind of need to focus our attention on.
Yeah, some new names and some stuff that could be aspirational, but then let's see what happens when they actually get on the field. You mentioned injury questions with Brees Hall. And again, it's always a case by case basis, and we should be paying
Mhm.
attention to everything and treating each case as an individual case. But overall, do you think you're more injury optimistic or injury pessimistic, or even if it gets granular, like you're more optimistic about ACLs, less optimistic about Achilles, or how you
Yeah.
approach projecting these players coming back from really rough injuries?
Yeah, it's so tough. I mean, I have been burned so bad by this the last couple of years about by being optimistic. 2 years ago, I was in on Saquon Barkley. Stephania Bell said, "Don't do that. It's a bad idea. Don't buy into this." And sure enough, she was correct. He started off well. Remember, he stepped on that guy's
Right.
foot, rolled his ankle, and everything fell apart. I felt like I was right there for a while, but it just was not a good season.
Hmm.
Then last year, I was like, "All right, I'm done with Saquon. Can't
Right.
can't buy in after three straight down years." She said, "Nope, you should be in on him. And by the way, stay away from J.K. Dobbins off the injury. You don't want him." I didn't listen, and that didn't go poorly. So I feel like I've just shot myself in the foot over and over and over on these injured running backs. So I've been avoiding these guys for the most part, Brees, and especially at his ADP and Javante Williams. But I feel like if there's going to be an exception to this, it's got to be Hall, right? I mean, he just
Right.
it seems like the injury was pretty straightforward. It was repaired. Everything's going great. It looks like legit. He'll be good to go for maybe some preseason action, but certainly week one. And he's so young and so effective, so involved in the passing game that there's hope here. So I'm going to keep picking Stefania's brain. I'm going to keep monitoring reports from Rich Cimini covering the team and just try to be smart about it. But the thing with Brees is it's an easy fade at his ADP, right? He's just going so early that it's not like you're like a fifth round pick, all right, I'll take a flyer here. It's like, do I really invest a round two pick? I don't think so. That's a lot for a guy coming
Yeah.
off this injury.
It's tough. It's tough because, Mike, if he was healthy, if he hadn't gone down last year and continued on the trajectory he was on, he might have been the first running back off the board in drafts this
You're
year.
right. Hmm.
And then if you are more optimistic about this offense with Aaron Rodgers, it's tough. These are the questions. These are the questions that keep
Hmm.
us really engaged in fantasy football because there aren't good answers. You mentioned Stefania, and just I wanted to piggyback off that for a second. Tell me about your relationships at ESPN and how that's changed you as a fantasy analyst,
Hmm.
being in a group of people that are all among the best at what they do.
Yeah, it's great. It's like being off camera and being able to chat with people that are insiders or just no players, no agents, are just an expert in the field, former players, all those kind of things. I do fantasy football now Sunday mornings with Damian Woody, just hearing stories off cam about Bill Belichick and things like we're sitting there wondering, like all of us are, like, is this guy going to play this week? And he'll tell us a story about Belichick, and we'll be like, okay, so he's probably going to play because Belichick's going to want him to play. Like stuff like
Right,
that.
right, right.
Just little things like that add up over time, and it just makes you better at your job. So it's great. And obviously Stefani's one of those. Just having her
Oh
expertise in
yeah.
the injury department is an advantage, and I love picking her brain about stuff like this.
What's something you've learned that surprised you about somebody or the NFL and how it works, or just something that you said, "Oh, okay, wow, I really have to update how I think of this because I thought something different. I just wasn't aware of that."
Oh man, I almost where my brain went is what I just laid out. I think it's with the injuries.
Uh huh.
With the running back injuries and the ACLs and the Achilles. That's probably the most substantial adjustment I've made, kind of to my model, is being a little bit more conservative with these running backs and players coming off injuries. Like this year, one of the first things I did when I started to update my model is put a little note by all the players who had
Right.
major injury last year, right? ACL in week 7, ACL in week 4, Achilles in week whatever, just to make sure that I was factoring that in, because in past years it was like, all right, he tore his ACL last season, right? That was whatever. That was Thanksgiving last year. Whatever. It's now August. He'll be fine, right? Or September. He'll
Right.
be fine.
Right.
And that's not the case, right? So I'd have to think through that to go a little deeper, thinking
Sure.
about relationships with players. I'd have to prep more probably to think through that. But I would say how I factor it into fantasy projection specifically. It's got to be that injury level stuff.
Yeah, and I like to say one of my favorite sayings about all this, what we do is peeking through keyholes. But
Mhm.
you're not necessarily peeking through keyholes. Sometimes you're on the other side of the door. But would you agree with this statement that the truth or reality or whatever you want to call it is very different than most of us think, even those of us that spend a lot of time thinking about football?
I think I look. I think there's insiders who hear things that are still sort of, can be not all the time. Like I think the good insiders know what to listen to and what not to. There is a lot of stuff that's not reported. There's
Yeah.
stuff that agents want people to tweet, and most people will not say it. And that's sometimes why you'll see a report from one person, but not from the masses, right? Because that person
Hmm.
got that email and tweeted it out, and the people maybe at a different or higher level said, that's some nonsense, right? Like it's almost like an agent could say, I'm just going to make one up here. Denzel
Yeah.
Mims, this is his breakout year. This is
Yeah.
Denzel
Right.
Mims'
Right.
breakout year. And you're like,
Four teams
all
have been
right.
asking about trading for him, and the Jets keep
Yeah.
saying no
Yeah.
because they think he's going to break out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like how many like we can look at a depth chart and see that this is some nonsense here, right? We're not
Right.
playing this game. I'm not going to put my reputation on the line and tweet this out, right? So I think I've gotten better at just knowing,
Yeah.
our insiders at knowing that like some of that stuff you gotta see through the reports. Don't just buy into anything. And sometimes look from a fantasy perspective, that's something that I think you and I have always done. A lot of people do. If you could see through that news, sometimes I've gotten better at it, but we've always been able to see through it a little bit. You can take
Hmm.
advantage of that, especially in
Yeah.
dynasty leagues, and say, look, there's a report that player X is going to play a big role this season. I think it was like who's the most recent one? Terrace Marshall, right? This is
Right.
Terrace
Right.
Marshall's
Greg
breakout year,
Dulcich is
right?
going to be the Joker. Greg Dulcich is the new
Yeah,
Reggie
right.
Bush.
So what do? You go to your dynasty team and you say, you know what, I've been stashing Terrace Marshall. I'm going to put out some feelers, see if I can get a second round picker.
Yeah.
Like you
Exactly.
can play games with that if you see through that, and you got to know when it's legit and when it's an advantage to take advantage. When it's the time to take advantage of a spike in value that's probably fraudulent.
Yeah, I think that it used to be, Mike, that there was an information edge. Isn't that what all of us that were working for
Oh
different
yeah.
fantasy websites were trying to say? We're going to give you the information edge. Now there's not really an information edge because the information is out there. But the next level is being discriminating about which information you weight and which information you ignore. And I think
Hmm.
you laid that out really well. Okay, you mentioned Bill Belichick. What about the New England offense? Because we thought it was going to be a joke with Joe Judge and Matt Patricia. It kind of was a joke.
We got that
Bill,
right. Hey.
yeah. Sometimes you do. Sometimes the strong negative take ends up being correct.
Yeah.
But they got Bill O'Brien now. They got a real offensive coordinator. It sounds like from early reports that Bill Belichick is not leaning in on the offensive side anymore. He's letting Bill O'Brien do his thing. So has that led you to go back and bump up the New England offense as a whole, the size of the pie, and maybe be more optimistic?
Yeah, so I do adjust a little bit for coaching after the fact, but a lot of what I do is built around evaluating the roster, right? I think that's sometimes it's easy to just say, the team X is always good. We'll just project them high or assume they're going to be a high scoring offense. I think you just have to, actually break it down by the personnel and see how good a team actually is. So that's kind of the main driver, which is my unit grades for each team. So for New England on paper, I have them 23rd in my unit grades. Uh, you know, Strong at the tight end position. The offensive line is still above average. That's a good unit. Wide receiver is not great. Maybe if Juju's good and Taquan Thurman makes a leap, maybe that's different, but it's hard to get too excited about them. Running back's a decent Roma Stevenson, of course. But it comes down to how good are the quarterbacks. And if you rank each projected starting quarterback 1 to 32, I don't know how you put Mac Jones in the top 20. Maybe not in
No,
the top 25 after what we
no.
saw last season. He was benched at one
Yeah,
point, right?
yeah,
Um, and maybe with Bill O'Brien there, maybe he does have a breakout season and plays better than he did. As a rookie, you would usually expect a quarterback to make the year two leap. He did not do that. Um, but so I don't have high expectations for this offense right now, whether it's from the personnel or the quarterback position. But at least there's some hope, right? Like you
yeah.
said, last year there was a lot of reason for pessimism. This year, at least there's hope that maybe it all kind of comes together. But yeah, I don't know. You don't have to invest much in this offense. There's no one that really stands out other than Stevenson. And honestly, he makes me a little nervous right now, just
Yeah, I
because
agree.
is he going to live up to his ADP with all this? That's another one. Do we buy the Ty Montgomery hype? I mean, he was playing
Mhm.
a lot in passing situations before he got hurt last year. So there could be a little bit there. James Robinson, full year off the Achilles, another one of them injury guys. Could he have a role as well? So, but other than him, there's really not. You don't have to invest much in this offense to take a flyer on a Juju or a Thornton or a Gesicki, someone like that.
Yeah, I think again that's a good sober take. Hey, it's still the Patriots roster. Whatever magic Bill O'Brien can do, you can't really do that much magic. You still
Yeah.
need what Eye of Newt and all that other stuff. I don't know if the Patriots have Eye of Newt on their roster to really do some magic. What about the rookie quarterbacks? What about Indy, Carol? Well, I mean, yeah, Indy's quarterback play was pretty terrible last year. So Indy, Carolina, Houston, these were teams with pretty terrible quarterback plays. So now we're talking more, and you do have in Houston and Indy new offensive coordinators, but these teams had terrible, terrible quarterback play. Now they're rookies, so they're going to be thrown into the fire. It should be better. How much better? How are you approaching the offenses with rookie first round quarterbacks?
Yeah, so expectations are usually low for me for rookie quarterbacks. They usually don't put up good passing numbers. I recently did an article about the passing numbers for rookies, and it's usually like under 20. It's around like 17 touchdowns. Guy like first round quarterbacks that play appear in most of the games. It's like 17 touchdowns on average, right? Not many even hit 20. Certainly very rare to get to 25 like Justin Herbert did. So, the pocket quarterbacks like Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, low expectations from a fantasy perspective, right? And that's always the case for pocket rookie quarterbacks. It's year two. That's when you see these guys make a leap. It's happened over and over and over again. Trevor Lawrence being a fine example of that. He actually did some things with his legs in year two, but it's year two for those sort of guys. The big one is Anthony Richardson, and the problem there is ADP, right? He's going, like I said earlier, he's going one round after Deshaun Watson. It's too much for me. What if he really is not ready to be an NFL passer or is not a good NFL passer? I know that the eighth round is not a massive investment. I get that you want to take a flyer, fine, but there's just so much projection in there for a guy we felt was super raw coming into the league, really struggled throwing the football, and it might take him some time. So I understand that rookie quarterbacks who are good in fantasy do a lot with their legs. He's going to do a lot with his legs. It's not a super high risk move, but there's just other players in that range in drafts, and I'm going to go that direction. I'll take Watson around earlier. I'm totally fine with that, or just go another direction. I don't think I'm going to be drafting him much this season.
That's fair. I mean, I think that Anthony Richardson's going to have a few blow up games. Good luck predicting which games those are going to be, and then there are going to be some games. It's not going to be as bad as Justin Fields was a rookie year, first half of last year, but that should give you an idea. Although when you bring up Justin Fields, then you're like, well, like you said, year two, things got going. So speaking of year two quarterbacks, does that then, are you a little more in on a Kenny Pickett, even a Desmond Ritter, these offenses with second year quarterbacks? Is there something there where maybe you're finding yourself liking parts of those offenses or the quarterbacks more than ADP?
Yeah, so the Steelers were an odd team last year, and I think that this hasn't really been talked about much. I'm sure you're aware of this, but efficiency-wise, you look at the efficiency metrics offensively, they were pretty good. They're a little above average in most of those metrics, but they could not finish drives. Chris Boswell had all them field goal attempts. They could not score touchdowns. So what did they do? They bring in Allen Robinson, who was one of the most heavily targeted receivers in the NFL near the goal line last year. And they drafted some massive tight end in the second round named Darnell Washington, who's probably going to give Pat Freiermuth owners nightmares this year when he steals touchdowns away from him. So I think there was some strategy to that because he could not finish drives last season. But I feel pretty good about Pickett's progression. I don't know really what his ceiling is as a back end first round quarterback. He's obviously older, right? So it's not like he's 22. He's 25, so you'd expect him to be quite polished. And this is a big year for him. If we don't see it in his age 25 season with the supporting cast, a better O line, pretty good targets, I'm going to have some pretty big concerns. But to answer your question, the answer is yes. I am buying on Pickett as a late round flyer. It's not just the progression as a passer you expect. It's also his legs, right? I think he's going to be a factor there. I have him projected for over 250 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Not that elite level, but enough to get him into that back end quarterback one discussion if he does progress as a passer. So I do like him as a flyer. I do not like Ritter. That offense will be I do not at all. I can't believe that was their strategy going into this year. It's so rare for non-first round quarterbacks to pan out. There are exceptions, but he didn't show me anything to think that we should like him. Not to mention they're going to run that offense through the run game. It's going to be all Bijan. It's going to be Algier. It's going to be running the football. So no thanks from a fantasy perspective on Ritter.
Yeah. Well, does that mean so? Do you think people are getting a little out over the front of their skis on Bijan Robinson as a first round pick in redraft?
Absolutely not. No, I don't. As long as Ritter hands the ball to him and dumps it off to him, that's all we care about. I have him projected for around 300 touches. If he's healthy, it's going to be a bigger number than that. And again, I'm gonna beat this stat to death all offseason, but you look at the pushback is obvious, right? How can you take a guy in the first round that's never played an NFL down? I get that it's added risk, but also look at the last 6 running backs picked in the top 10. All of them were top 10 fantasy running backs.
Yeah.
You don't take a running back in the first round in the modern NFL and not run them into the ground. That has been the game plan. The efficiency has not mattered. These guys get work, and Bijan Robinson is going to get a ton of it in this run heavy offense. So I'm not worried about him at all. I would take him in the middle of the first round and feel great about it.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, and in Dynasty, I think he's running back one. I think
Yeah,
he's running
he
back
should
one
be.
in
I think he should
Dynasty.
be.
I think
Yeah.
he is. Okay. One other. We're talking a little bit team previews, projections, and then we'll get into that MFL 10 of Death 10. Um, uh, so Baltimore, run, 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 run. Enter Todd Monken. Enter Odell Beckham Jr. Enter Zay Flowers. We'll take these one by one, but they're twin, like two sides of the coin. This is a team. Rashad Bateman's going to be healthy again. Lamar Jackson is re-signed. You have to think that somewhere in those conversations about him being re-signed was what's the character of the offense going to be? How am I going to be used? So, and I understand, and I think the track record is obvious. Again, Death Taxes and Mike Clay, that, hey, I'll believe it when I see it, is usually a better position than, oh, we need to get out ahead of this. You can't overreact to this. But when you're projecting Baltimore's offense this year, how much are you abandoning those last 3 years, last 5 years numbers and trying to predict or project what this offense is going to look like, and how much are you being skeptical and saying, yeah, I get it, but I don't know. I need to see it first.
Mm-hmm. So put it this way, I'm looking at my team stat rankings, and I have them projected 30th in pass attempts and first in carries in the NFL this season. So that's probably your answer. I did adjust a little bit. Like, I don't have them as run heavy as they've been in years past. But even if you do adjust for that, even if you make them, let's say, right down the middle, right, and even pass run, not 50-50, that's not how the league works. But if you're a balanced offense, you're whatever, 60% pass, in that range, 62%. So even if you put them right there, you still have a quarterback that is going to drop back to pass, see no one's open, and scramble with the football. And Lamar is going to do that a lot. So that's going to bring down your targets in this passing offense, and it's going to increase the rushing attempts. I have him projected with 145 carries this season. That's still one of his strengths. I do think there's a chance that he puts up a career high in pass attempts this season, but he's still going to run the ball a lot, and that's going to take away a ton of volume from the passing game. So I guess that's the answer, right? It's good for fantasy too. We're fine with that. Lamar has a chance to be put up some big passing numbers, still be a factor with his legs, and be a top 5, top 3, maybe the top scoring fantasy quarterback this season. So yeah, I mean, I read the tea leaves. I've adjusted a little bit, but I don't think this is going to be a pass heavy offense or even a pass first offense.
So this might, and I love, by the way, you just tucked in there, hey, a balanced offense is 60-40 now. That's balance in the NFL, which, again, when you started doing this, that was not true. That is not what a balanced run, a quote unquote balanced run pass split looked like. So you might have already answered this question with your answer to the previous question. On the flip side of that, you got Denver, right? The big trade for Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's going to elevate everything. We're so optimistic about everybody in this pass offense last year, and it just cratered. Now, there's other parts of the story. Speaking of Nathaniel Hackett, once Justin Alton, I forget, is he with Tennessee now? I think as a running back coach. Once he started calling plays, the offense did get a lot better. I don't know. But Sean Payton comes in, and with the exception of the Marvin Mims pick, boy, it looks like they're going to lean into the running game. You've already mentioned Javonte Williams, and they signed Samaje Perine for what is like starter money now for running backs. So how are you factoring in the first year of the Sean Payton experience in Denver?
Yeah, so again, when there's question marks like this, and there's a coaching change, and there's a quarterback where you're not sure, is he going to be old Russell Wilson? Is he going to be last year Russell Wilson? There's just a lot of question marks. A good way to evaluate is just to look at the roster talent, right? And they check in for me 13th. I have them actually 13th in offense and defense. So I do think this is a team that's going to bounce back a little bit just based on the personnel and improved coaching, right? We believe in Sean Payton. The guy was masterful during his time with New Orleans, and even his time before that in the NFL when he wasn't a head coach. So I'm buying a little bit here. I think that Russell Wilson will get back into that streaming conversation. I don't know if we'll get over the top and be a must start every week in fantasy, but like the wide receiver room, obviously Jerry Jeudy finally somewhat quietly has come around and become a number one. I don't think, Cortland Sutton at this point, probably a two, a depth guy, just so inconsistent. It's so frustrating because I've been on the bandwagon for so long. But even depth there with Tim Patrick, Marvin Mims, maybe Hamler at some point. So I think they have a decent team in place. And they did, one of their objectives was offensive line, right? They went out and brought in Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers during the offseason. Garrett Bowles was out most of last season. That was a problem, right? So fixing that tackle spot could be big for them. By the way, we talked about the Jets. That's the weak spot there. That's what scares me. The offensive tackles, is that going to be a problem for Rodgers in that offense? But, obviously Denver and Peyton and the new regime address that. And I like the look of that offensive line. So I do think they'll be better. I do think they'll be better. And I've projected as a slightly above average offense.
Did you hear, Mike, that Mekhi Becton's in the best shape of his life?
I've heard
did.
that.
I did hear that. We'll see. You're right. Like again, I think they had like 6 different offensive tackles they used last year, and it's important. I think Carter Warren, the 4th round pick they took, Kenny Pickett's old blindside protector, he's a little banged up. So we'll see. Dwayne Brown, Mekhi Becton. What's the over under for combined game played this year? Like 20, 25. Oh,
yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's tough. And if they're out, Max Mitchell and Billy Turner, is that who's in there? It's Brown's getting old, coming off a tough season, and Becton played like 37 snaps the last 2 seasons. That it could be good, by the way. If Brown bounces back and Becton, it could be good, but
hey, there's optimism there too.
Yeah, there's upside, but there's also a ton of risk there.
Yeah, these are the conversations I think are really great in June, Mike. It's like, okay, just file this stuff away, and if it's week 3 and the Jets are overperforming and Brown and Becton are both healthy, and there's more, hey, Becton is hitting this new peak in his career, well, then buy in, and what might seem a buy high on the Jets offense ends up being a buy low when they actually get good health out of their offensive tackles. Alternatively, if Becton, it's week 1 and you see him, with his arm hanging and walking off the field, you're like, oh boy, here we go. Okay, before we go off the rails, let's talk a little bit about the MFL 10 of death. And for those that don't know, we've all been tweeting out about it. This is our 10th year. It's awesome. Pat Thorman, who runs it, who's just a mensch. Sean Siegel, everybody knows, FF Contrarians. Denny Carter is one of my favorite people in fantasy football. JJ Zacharias, another of my favorite people. Ryan Forbes, Rumfield Johnny. Rumfield Johnny's just awesome. Lord Reeves, brilliant. Evan Silva, the big dog himself. Beerswater and Scott Barrett, frequent visitor to the couch. Okay, you drew the number 5 pick. This is the old MFL 10 format, right? So it's 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a flex, a tight end, just straight PPR. Not a lot of wrinkles, right? A quarterback, of course. But no super flex. Not a lot of wrinkles. We're traditionalists here. You start out running back. Philosophically, is it a philosophical move, or was it just, hey, I was on the clock and Austin Eckler and Derrick Henry, those were the best picks available?
Yeah. So look, I've had success in this format. I've won 2 of the last 3, so I usually feel pretty confident going into it. Just because part of it is because this group is really predictable,
they're insane.
And that it's predictable though in that it's aggressive at wide receiver, right?
So
I often end up really stacked at running back. That happened again, as we'll get to in a second. But I do have a regret in this one, and I think it's going to burn me, which is when I was at 5, I was like, well, Eckler's atop my board, but knowing how this league drafts, I should go Cup here, and then the running backs will come to me. I ended up going Eckler, and it burnt me because I'm in a shaky spot at wide receiver. Again, I've been here. I think the 2 I won, I was a little shaky at wide receiver as
Yeah.
well, and it worked out fine. But yeah, it was just best available, right? I took Eckler, and then I came back, and Derrick Henry jumped out. It was like Olave went next, and you took Devontae Smith, T. Higgins. So I went Derrick Henry there. Eckler, Henry. Um, and yeah, so it was best on the board. But then actually, kind of same kind of thinking. Round 3, it was like, all right, running a bunch of wide receivers are gone. I think 15 more off the board. Looking at this, I have to get a wide receiver, but I was debating ETN or Amari Cooper there, and this shows you how far running backs fall. I
Hmm.
took Amari Cooper. I was like, I'm going to get that number one, borderline number one receiver, all the way back around through the 3rd round, back through the 4th round. ETN staring at me. I couldn't believe it. So I feel like that was probably one of the steals of the draft, was to get ETN late in the or middle part of the 4th round. So I felt pretty good coming out that way.
Yeah, I think that there's some really good stuff in there, particularly about hey, you might have a strategy, but you have to know your league. You have to
Yeah.
know how your league drafts, and they are insane about wide receivers, just
Oh yeah.
insane. And Mike, every year I debate like, am I just going to go if you can't beat them, join them? Also,
Mm-hmm.
overdraft wide receivers because I'm going to hate the wide receivers I'm picking, or do I do like you do? And I think I took sort of split the middle, but a little more like what you did this year. I two out of my first 3 picks were with the Kelsey Mahomes stack. I took
Yeah.
Kelsey at number 3. But I looked at Cooper Cup at number 3, but I thought, boy, the Rams feel like an offense that's just going to crater this
That's
year.
why I didn't take Cup. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just as scared of that all falling apart. I don't think people realize how awful that defense is. I mean,
Oh,
I have never, ever since I've been in this industry ever seen a defense in this shape, and that's a
yeah.
defense with Aaron Donald. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
you look at their roster. I'm telling you right now, while you're listening to the show, flip over to the check the depth chart, whatever you want to do. Look at the roster, and let me know how many defenders you recognize, because most of it's undrafted free agents.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really,
It's
I
bad.
mean, undrafted rookie free agents. It is rough.
Well, and from a fantasy football standpoint, Mike, I think people's first reaction is, "Oh, it's garbage time. Lots of garbage time, garbage time,
Yeah.
garbage time." But hey, if your defense can't get off the field, there ain't gonna be much garbage time production. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everyone's talking about Arizona. Well, it's gonna be tough for the Rams to be worse than Arizona, maybe, but there's a dark horse for that number 1 pick. What is it, Caleb? Like, I don't even know what the alliteration would be with Caleb Williams, but you get it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, like you said, you got Travis Etienne. I'm just gonna say because you mentioned Etienne, no one's taken him yet, and it's bad because I only allotted for 5 running backs, so I'm not gonna take another running back. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that he's been taken yet, but Tank Bigsby, watch out for Tank Bigsby. I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if he has closer to James Robinson's role than people expect.
Mm-hmm.
Watch that one in training camp.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that they've already basically said they want to cut back Etienne's running a little bit. I'm not super worried about that. I mean, it's not like he's tiny, right? He's 215 pounds. I think
Right.
he'll have a plenty of a role. There's and by the way, you go team by team, you're going to see the same thing. You're just going to see a kind of a cap on the share of carries that guys are going to get. That's normal. So I'm not really worried about that. And also, Etienne still has room to grow as a pass catcher. His target share
Yeah.
last year was kind of disappointing. But he's good in that area, right? So I think that his usage there has room to improve. So even if I'm a little high on carries, which I'm not, it's not an astronomical number. Even if I'm a little high there, I could be a little low on targets as well. So to get him in the 4th round, a young player like that in a good upcoming, improving offense, I feel great about that.
Well,
They're another team with O line concerns, though. That's the one thing I'll say about it.
right. That's why they take the offensive tackle in the 1st round. Cam Robinson's going to miss some time with. They also lose Jawan Taylor to Kansas City, who's going to play
Mm-hmm.
right tackle after all. Looks like Donovan Smith's going to be the left tackle there, and we'll
Or
see
Kansas City,
for
or
Kansas
yeah,
City. Right. They lose
yeah,
Jawan Taylor to Kansas City. They are ready to promote, I guess, Walker Little. We'll
yes,
see, and we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Here's one where you and I are maybe rooting for different things because you take T.J. Hawkinson
mm-hmm.
in the 5th round, which I was happy to see, by the way, as the person who took Kelsey number 3. Thank you. Just anything to push the tight ends further on the board.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know that feeling. Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I,
I'm sure
I
you like any time a quarterback's picked as well. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then I take at 6'10 Jordan Addison. So because Kelsey Hawkinson, after he joined Minnesota last year, was worth more than the third pick of the fifth round. I mean,
Oh yeah.
he was outstanding. He was terrific from a fantasy perspective, and just as the clear number two target in this offense with Adam Thielen getting dusty. Then you bring in Jordan Addison. How did you initially? What's your first pass at that after the draft, and how you think this offense is going to shake out that justifies Hawkinson in the fifth?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really good. Like you said, Hawkinson was kind of unleashed, free. We always use the hashtag free, whoever it may
Mm-hmm.
be, Kareem
Mm-hmm.
Hunt, you name the player, free Aaron Jones, whoever it is. Hawkinson was finally freed after he went to Minnesota. I believe he had more 10 plus target games with Minnesota last year than he had in his entire career with the Lions, or if not, the numbers were very close. So I don't think that changes. Again, Minnesota, since Kirk Cousins got there, is sixth in offensive touchdowns. They're fifth over the last 3 seasons. He's right up there in terms of his offense scoring touchdowns. Kirk Cousins is with some elite quarterbacks across the league like Allen and Mahomes. So I feel really good about Hawkinson. And I get that, he kind of broke out as Thielen was fading. But remember, KJ Osborne had some big games stepping into a larger role. So it was less Thielen, but it was more Osborne. They were still producing at a high level, and Hawkinson was just delivering elite tight end numbers. So I feel great about that in the fifth round. I wanted to get one of them top guys, and I feel like
Yeah.
Hawkinson is in that conversation.
Yeah, and he followed up with Justin Fields, and I do think that one of the keys to being in the running to win, win a best ball league is you have to have a ceiling at every position. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like you can just completely ignore a position, and there are ways that you can wait at a position and still build in ceiling at the position. You can build in more numbers. I mean, I thought that you reacted appropriately to the only having Amari Cooper early because you took some veterans like Brandon Cooks, Odell Beckham. Who knows what Brandon Cooks could do with a competent quarterback? Odell Beckham, if he can stay healthy, there's a connection there. Baltimore's certainly paying him like they expect something good from him. But then you get some high floor guys like Jacoby Myers. And then you come in with Rashi Rice. Hey, who's going to be the guy that emerges in Kansas City? Let's throw a dart. So I think that it reflects like during a draft, you need to self scout and be honest about, okay, how am I going to, if I can make this build work, who are the kinds of players that can make it work? And I'm doing the same thing, right? Like I'm taking
Mm-hmm.
Zay Jones and Rashid Shaheed, Curtis Samuel. I got to ask you just because those are my favorite picks. Like I'm sitting on him, and I'm like, okay, I can't wait any longer. What do you think about my, I believe, brilliant pick? Because I started out with Devontae Smith and Drake London. I was pretty happy with Drake London in the late fourth as a potential second year leap guy. Although,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, Desmond Ritter, Rashid Shaheed, I feel like he's really going under the radar,
Yeah.
especially if everybody's like Michael Thomas. Well, Michael Thomas isn't going to. Well, okay, well then you have Rashid Shaheed as a top two receiver with Derek Carr, who showed last year that as undrafted free agent he can hang.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just tough. I mean, if Olave and Thomas are healthy, I think it's going to be hard for him to be relevant in fantasy. But it is year two. Maybe he makes a leap. I mean, look, he's the 66th receiver off the board. So, it's
Right.
Darius Slayton went a pick before, and I took Rashee Rice a pick before that. So it's fine. I mean, maybe he is one of those kind of diamond in the rough sort of players, and we're undervaluing him right now. I guess I have no qualms with it at this point in the draft. I'm certainly lower than you are.
Well,
I kind of have him buried.
well, let me ask you this. Let me turn this on its head and ask you this: how many games do you have Michael Thomas projected to play?
I have him. Let's see here. I have him missing 4, right? So, but I have at least 2 for every receiver. Just normal injury
Sure.
rates. You kind of have to project that way. So that would be what is it? 13 games. 13 games
Yeah,
for
and that
Thomas.
would actually be a big success, right? If you get if you
Yeah.
draft Michael Thomas at ADP and you get 13 games out of him this
Yeah.
year, you're probably pretty happy because he produced last year before he got hurt. We'll see.
Mhm.
Down here in New Orleans, he's a vexing player. Hasn't really been the same since he got his contract. All right. I'll stop picking your brain about projections and team previews and stuff. And again, folks, if you don't know Mike Clay, come on, you listen to this show. What did you do? Just stumble onto this show like you're new to fantasy football? You know Mike Clay. You see Mike Clay up on your TV, and you know Mike Clay is going to help you win. Okay, let me take it back to ESPN in a way, Mike, because I don't know exactly when you and I started going Sword and Shield. I think Were you even at PFF yet? I don't even know.
Probably not. I was probably at fantasydc.com, fantasy depth chart. That was the
Yeah.
first site I
What happened to
created.
Fantasy
So
DC?
I left it expire. I had
Oh,
I
that was
bought
like
the
your
name
own
from
personal site.
that was, yeah. I should have
Wow.
probably kept it alive just so I can compare and see how bad of a writer I was back at the beginning, or better. Who knows? It's
Yeah,
hard to say.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I was kind of actually I was frustrated with the projections in the industry because it was like you'd look at projections and see like, okay, this team's projected for 3,500 passing yards, but 5,100 receiving yards, and I was like,
Mhm.
this is dumb. Like you can't draft this way. So that was my inspiration to get started when I was bored at my accounting job, and that started
Yeah.
fantasydc.com. Yeah.
Yeah. How many of us, our origin story is I was bored at my day job and I thought I can do this. So a lot of things have changed for you since you started fantasydc.com. What's something that hasn't changed?
What's something that hasn't changed? Well, I'm still a nerd for sure. I mean, I've been that my whole life for sure. So I guess that's it. I mean, I feel that like you go on vacation and you sit down, you relax on the beach chair, and you just feel comfortable and the stress fades. I feel like that when I settle in and I'm like, all right, it's time to work on projections,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
write an article or do some research. So I mean, I feel like that is something that it's kind of my passion for it. My love for coming up with new stats or new projects or putting out my 65-page projection PDF and stuff. Working on the magazine and all the tedious stuff that goes into that. That'll be a newsstand, like all that stuff. Still just love it. It really is a hobby that is my job now. And it feels like a job sometimes, but I still love it a lot, and it's something I like to do when I'm bored. I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's great that I'll call them your children, Mike. All the different statistics, all the different things that have gotten into the lexicon of fantasy football because of the work you've done. Who's your favorite? Well, and we should never say who our favorite child is. But between you and me, who's your favorite child of all the different stats, of all the different approaches, of all the different light bulb aha moments that have then informed you and many other people down the line? Who's your favorite child?
I think it has to be average depth of target,
Yeah, A
right? It
dot.
has to be A dot. A dot. That's the one. The first time I saw it on TV, like I think the first time it was on TV was when right after Chris Collinsworth bought PFF and he was at NBC and A dot popped up on the screen. Like that was an awesome moment. And I know air yards had been around a little bit before that. I know Brian Burke did some work on air yards. I think he came up with that term, but A dot was kind of a new thing. I was at PFF and we had all this data being charted and no one was utilizing it. So I would start creating stats out of it. And ADOT was a huge one, right? It just changed the way we looked at players. We had a better understanding for how they were utilized, and we could put numbers on the difference between like Tim Tebow and Alex Smith, right? And say, yeah, this guy, here's proof that he's way too conservative, and here's proof Tim Tebow is way too aggressive. And you could better understand a low completion percentage because of things like that, or a high completion percentage can be, justified as kind of fluky. So I think ADOT was probably the big one.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, people have become so much more conversant in this way, this lens of looking at the game, and it's just the why of things that maybe intuitively we understand as seasons of football wash over us.
Mhm.
But it's good to have the numbers that actually prove that it's true. And then sometimes when you delve into the numbers, you realize, well, some of those things we think are true actually aren't true. Okay, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see this one of your other passions, and I'm going to let you make a pitch or otherwise try to convert me because as far as auto racing goes, I've been to a few Indy 500s. The Indy 500 is an awesome event to go to. Although
Mhm.
I've never been to a NASCAR race, and I imagine you'd probably tell me like, oh, I mean, every NASCAR race is like the Indy 500 as far as the five, right? I remember the first time I went to the Indy 500, my uncle, who him and his buddies have been going for years and years and years and years, he said there are two rules in Indy: don't fight and don't steal. Otherwise, you're good. Like
Yeah.
you camp in people's yards. You go and
Yeah.
it's a lot like Fish Tour, which was like my passion of my like teens and 20s. So I watched some IndyCar racing. I know Formula One is on the rise. My old
Sure is.
hometown, Austin. I know they're big on Formula One, but I know you have a deep, deep love for NASCAR. Sell me on NASCAR. Give me a reason or reasons to watch a NASCAR race and get into it.
Yeah, so I mean, my passion came from it since before I was even aware of anything. Right, I was a little kid. My dad raced on dirt in Pennsylvania. Was a track champion
Oh,
at Big Diamond and Penn National, which is more well known casino these days. But they have a horse track there, and in Pennsylvania, and there used to be a dirt track. And my dad raced there, so that's kind of where it started. I grew up going to races, and so it's always just been a part of my life. So it's hard for me to say it's not a thing like I just got into it at age like 25. You know,
hmm
it's always been there for me. But you kind of said it when you talked about like the fish tour or other big events. It used to be it's a Super Bowl every weekend, and that's really the fun of it. It's not even necessarily the racing; it's the party. We go down. I This year was the 23rd time in the last 25 years. The only exceptions were COVID years. To the Coca-Cola 600 weekend. I've spent 23 of my last 25 Memorial Days in Charlotte. And by the way, I didn't even see an engine fire up this year because of rain. Both races, Saturday and Sunday, rained out. But I have friends down there. I went down with friends and my dad, and we had a great time. We were just out in the town in Charlotte. We were around the track a little bit on Saturday, hanging out with friends with the NASCAR. Visit shops. It's a big fan fest down there that weekend, and it's great. It's just this scene. The people are great. It's not really the stereotype. It's maybe a little bit of the stereotype of NASCAR fans, but not a lot. But it's just great. It's a great time. We have a lot of fun around it, and I joke sometimes that the race is almost a letdown because it's the end of
yeah,
the weekend and it's the
right,
last
right.
thing you do. But yeah, it's just a fun community, and we have a great time. And if you're into NASCAR, too, get in, know the drivers, understand what's happening, follow the race. It's a fun part of it as well.
And you've gotten to do some fun stuff because you're at ESPN with respect to like getting to be behind the scenes or do some things otherwise you
Mhm.
would not have been able to do with NASCAR.
Yeah, I've been getting the hot passes for a long time, which is well now they're called VIP passes, I guess. But that means you just kind of free reign to the garage and the pits. Stand out on pit road for the national anthem and all that stuff, and be in the garage and meet people, meet drivers. So that's I almost take it for granted now. I try not to, but it's a lot of fun to be in that area. But plus now, being at ESPN, I have drivers that follow me, and I can interact with them and help them with their fantasy football teams and stuff too, which is an awesome way to kind of marry the two things together.
Yeah, it's funny. When at one time I went, one of the times I went to Indy, my uncle knows Chip Ganassi, so
Oh, awesome.
we were able to get down like to where the drivers hang out. I
Mhm.
remember I have a Polaroid of my best friend at the time, Gautam, who had raced back in India. He had moved to India like we already 11 or 12. He was already racing, we went to Indy. I remember I have a picture of Mario Andretti signing his shirt like a Polaroid. Polaroids, Mike. Remember
Wow, back
Polaroids?
in back in
Did
the
the
day.
kids
Yeah.
still know about Polaroids? I guess the Padres, when they get a home run, they take a Polaroid. But there was one. It was Willie T. Ribs. I'm so embarrassed, right? And it was he signed it. He signed the Polaroid was great, but he had a sandwich in his other hand. I'm like, oh man. I guess I was like 17, so getting access. Was there real quick? Is there anything getting that access where there was a moment like you almost got run over, or you were standing in the wrong place, or something? You're like, whoa, okay, I've got this access, but I need to be careful, or
Oh yeah,
otherwise, yeah.
all the time, especially at Charlotte when they were doing practices and they would come in from practice and they come in a like good 55 miles an hour into the garage and they have specific lanes they go through. Sometimes you see in the in car in practice when they pull into the garage and there's people just lined up around them, and they're close. I mean, I've had cars coming at me 55 miles an hour right next to me through the garage, and it's yeah, you have those moments where you're jumping out of the way, but people rarely get hurt. I mean, it's packed down there. People rarely get hit. It almost never happens. Maybe once I could think of in the last 20 years. So, and nothing serious either. So, yeah, I've had those moments for sure.
Well, everything that Mike Clay does is going to come at you not at 55 miles an hour, but at a nice speed that you'll be able to absorb. It will make you a better fantasy football player. It's been a long time, too long. Hope it's not as long again until we get to hang out on
Sure.
air. Mike, everybody, and remember, the Football Guys Championship is up at NFFC, so check that out. We're gonna have some good stuff going on. We'll be part of a live stream this weekend, Friday night with Tom Kesnick and Greg Ambrosius, and all kinds of good stuff. We got a little bit of a lull before you know it's going to be training camp, and we're going to be doing all these wonderful things for you because we love you.